you tell us anything about what was left in the OT rooms in Old Main? In the sewing room or
Oh, the
research room?
sewing room was fascinating because when they abandoned the sewing room, they just got up and left. Serge cloth, big heavy. I don't know how those poor people wore that stuff. Weighed a ton, but we still had the weaver's label from New York City, delivered in the 50s. You could see the delivery date on it with the stacks, and they were going to make their clothing with that. And the sewing room was probably 100. I'm thinking 100 feet by maybe 80 feet. It was big. It was quite large. It was on the second floor. They had hardwood floors, but the sewing machines were ganged to a single power drive. They had a 1 horsepower motor with belt drive that did the whole bunch of them. And it was kind of interesting to see how the belt connected to all this. And bobbins were still in place. There were still, the thread count looked like 10th thread. That's how heavy it was. So they built stuff there to last, And, but when they left, it was just, the only thing missing when you walked in the room was people.
Mm-hmm.
And it was that thing is like at night you go in there with a flashlight and with the shadows, and York Street, the cars would go by and you see these shadows. If there's any ghosts, they were in there. I mean, that was and it was a bet that we had among the safety officers on a rainy night. If you could spend an hour up there, you were a hero.
They got you in.
Oh, yeah, you get nervous. And I was reading Stephen King novels back at the time, and I'd go up there and see how long I could stand it. And we get a winter night where there's not much going on, and I'd sit down and I'd say, I can't do this. I'd have to get up and leave. And then associated with that, there was a little to the music room. Was a down. This was in the wings, but you go down to the music room, and they just left their instruments. They just got up, and it was very, very strange the way it was done.
And what sort of instruments were there?
There was a tuba there. There was a bass fiddle. There was in rough shape. Looked like somebody hit somebody with it. But there was a couple of 6-string guitars, acoustic guitars, and some brass. I remember, I think it was a trumpet without a slide and that kind of stuff, but it was in pretty bad array. Yeah. And that area was not secure, and I have to think if you had a good trumpet in there or something, I'm sure that, somebody else just decided to go out the door. None of that stuff was accounted for, and I'm sure that some of those instruments had probably been, they're a century old, some of them, yeah, it was just an interesting to walk in and see that. It's fascinating.
How about the basement in the original building?
That was striking in that it was built of like little Dutch bricks. They're a little smaller than a standard brick, but the walls were the walls downstairs were all like that. It was quaint. It was almost like something out of like a Monet. You're walking down there, and it was pretty. The colors were rich, the tones were rich. There was a little a railroad track that they used to serve food on dumbwaiters, and what they would do is that would come out of the kitchen. There was a turnstile. They would turn the turnstile and then push the carts. They were hand pushed, and then they would put the food on the dumbwaiters, and they would run that up for the patients.
The turnstile was like a roundhouse?
Yes, it was. Yeah, it would route. It would come up off the central kitchen,
right,
and then you could turn it and go left or right with it.
Okay.
It was kind of neat,
Yeah.
The tracks were there. They had removed some of it, but the tracks were still there. The deeply set track was there for forever. I mean, it was there for a long, long time. And I think some of the raised room, because of the trip hazard, I think that they pulled that out. And
concrete floor?
No, they were block. They were stone. Yeah, they were stone. There was some poured concrete in some areas. I think maybe where the blocks had picked and pulled up, and what they did is repaired it with concrete. But the most of the was big fieldstone blocks, and and of course plus the other main support stones that were just gigantic. I mean, they were huge, and I mean you could stand underneath the columns, and which was kind of eerie, because you're realizing that some of those columns there's no support, except whatever they've trellised in here, and done. I don't know what the engineering was behind it. It was pretty good. We never got squished, so I was happy about that.
And the columns you're talking about are the ones in the portico.
Correct. Right.
Right.
Yeah, but you could actually go right underneath there,
right,
under those stairs, those stone steps in the front, and that's where all the ward books ended up going. They pushed all the ward books into that area. It was kind of safe, and no water got in there. That was one of the dry areas in the building where there was no leakage. And they figured that was, and those books were like the Gutenberg Bible. I mean, they were enormous. They were gigantic. They were leather bound. And you go through, and I think there was like a year. Yeah, they would open them and close them within a year's period. And every shift nurse would come in and do a review, you know, and make her notes from there. You know, it was kind of fascinating reading. When they were treating, they treated Civil War wounded. They would train. They'd bring them up on the train, and they would treat them. And you could read some of the case histories in the ward books. So you see how these, you know, the losses were horrendous. I mean, you know, it was, you know, people were dying all the time, but no antibiotics, and you can just imagine, you know. But it was just, you know, it just goes back into that time, and you just start to realize they're doing the best they could. But, you know, it was what they had, and that's all they had, you know.
And your impression was that the ward books went how far back?
Well, Civil War. That was the earliest. That was the earliest book that I found. Okay. 1864, 1865.
So that would only be 20 years after the facility opened.
Yeah, 1837, right, yeah.
What else was in the basement? The main building.
It was a nuclear fallout shelter designated, okay? And when they ended that, we had all these barrels of water, and we laughed. We called it nuclear radiation candy, but they were high quality. They were good candies. There were bowls of them in that hospital for 5 years afterwards. I don't know how many hundreds of tons of that stuff they had, but they were cherry and lemon. And they says, well, give it away. It's still good. It hasn't expired yet. It was going to expire in a year. And there was some K rats and C rats and more bandages than, you know, I'm thinking, you know, we got a little more, if the bomb hits, we're going to have a lot more to worry about than bandages, you know. And but they had just tons and tons of the GI cardboard, wax cardboard containers and stuff. The basement was full of that stuff. And but I was there when they pulled all that out, and that was I think 84. I think they ended that. They said they no more fallout shelters.
How about the original sprinkler system?
There were 18 stations, sprinkler stations fed by a main. Each station routed sections of pipes into different areas of the building. Okay, so that if a sprinkler head went, it would each sprinkler station had a clapper valve, okay, that would release with a drop of pressure above it. And our job was to make sure that these were functional, that the pressure coming in was adequate to trip the clapper, and that there was enough pressure in the lines. We tested those. I tested them 2 or 3 times, where we went up and tested the flow out of the sprinkler heads. Different officers would pull the job. It was a pretty good job. Well, it wasn't, you know, you had the right equipment and stuff, and we would go in and do it. But they wanted to protect that against fire. And our job was to make sure that all 18 of those sprinkler stations stayed functional. And so that was, I enjoyed it. There was guys that refused. You know, there were some of the safety officers who would actually pay you money to go out and do it. They were assigned, I'm not going in there. And I go, well, I'll take care of it, you know. And I enjoyed it. And I did them, I was in the building all the time. I was just in there all the time. And a lot of it was that there were people did start to get in there, okay, over it's curiosity seekers from the neighborhoods, that kind of stuff. And but I'd like to go through there because we had one runaway girl who actually lived there for a week. And, you know, and the parents were livid with us. I go, well, you know, come on, it's a big building. You know, your daughter's not trying to be found. I mean, she was, you know, and she brought herself a foam mattress and had a little dresser, and you know, she really went to town. You know, everything ended well in the case, you know, but that's what the kind of stuff that we were dealing with. And you got an abandoned building, and you're going to have incidents like that. It's just the way it is. And but I enjoyed going in there. I enjoyed keeping an eye on it, and I also wanted to know, because the old locks, we had a mix of old skeleton and Corbin locks, and the Corbins were good. The Corbins, I think they still work, and but the old skeleton locks would get pretty crusty. And
What's a Corbin lock?
A Corbin is a regular, what you would call your typical modern lock.
Okay.
Now the skeleton locks, okay, they went back, I mean,
right,
forever, and they had small skeletons, and then they had the big block locks, okay, which were much more strong. And but most of Old Main was mostly the old ones, the thin, easily to break skeleton keys. And the more secure buildings were not connected with Old Main. Okay, that had stopped. They had moved those people out to Brigham, you know. And so I think most of the residents of Old Main were what they called the good patients, you know, the good old patients that never gave anybody a bad time. And kind of an idyllic, you know, if you talk to the old ward staff and stuff, it was a nice place. I mean, it was you know, in the 40s and 50s and whatnot, it was probably raised their standard of living in many cases. And that was always the thing we always made mention, that was the biggest poorhouse in the world, was the psych center. So, and a lot of people, that's what happened. They just, you know, couldn't cut it anymore. What we call today the homeless, okay, ended up, we'll sign them in. You used to pay a $25 reward for crazy people. Really. And the white nets, that's not a myth. They had a white net that they would, you know, and the ward attendants with the white hats and the big old ambulance. There's pictures of those around. I mean, I saw the pictures of the old ambulance. You know, so, but yeah, the heyday of you know, mental health was during the Rockefeller era, because he was personally, he thought that you could solve all of the world's problems by treating mental health more actively. I mean, he took that to the level almost of a fetish. I mean, it was, you know, but when Rocky was gone, so was the Office of Mental Health at the layers, at the, you know, at the level that he had brought it to, and it was like you could just see the decline, you know, overall. And now, you know, they treat patients only when they absolutely have to, and they hope from a private hospital will take them, you know, so they don't have to deal with it. And but that's just where they are now with it, you know. So.